What's happening, everybody, and welcome back to the Chaplaincy on the Go podcast. I'm your host, Josh Zorhoff. I'm a teaching pastor and a counselor in the West Michigan area, and this podcast is brought to you by the Fearless family of churches. We are wrapping up a conversation on loss and grief. And as we wrap up this conversation, we're going to introduce one more dynamic of loss and grief, and that is the dynamic of loss and grief as you journey with a chronically ill child. One of the realities of loss and grief is that we sometimes have to love and care for people who are chronically ill, maybe because of cancer, maybe because of an autoimmune disorder, maybe because of a genetic reality that we have no control over. And we're going to talk through the dynamics of that with a friend of mine, Layna O'Connor. Layna and her husband, Mike, have two children, one of whom has a chronic illness. It is a genetic element in illness, and this is called Pyruvate Dehydrogenase complex deficiency. And I'm only going to say that once because I really hope that I got it right. It is PDCD for short. Layna's going to talk a little bit more about what that means, but really share with us what it means to love and care for a child who has unique needs, in addition has a chronic illness, and what that means and how grief and loss play a part in that. And so we're going to get to hear from Layna in the next two episodes, and we're going to dive into her story right now. All right, here we are with Layna O'Connor. Excited to have you on the podcast. Layna, tell us a little bit about you and help us get to know you a little bit better.
Okay, yes. Hi, I'm Layna O'Connor. My husband, Mike, and I live in Grand Rapids, and we work in Holland at EV Construction, which is how we got introduced to Josh. We have two kids, a 3-year-old daughter named Piper, and then a 5.5-month-old son named Patrick.
Nice. And what do you like to do for fun?
Go for walks when it's nice weather. I like to cook and bake and hang out with the kids, go on a date night when we can.
Nice. And Mike and I share some pretty significant hobbies.
Yes.
He likes to grill.
Yes. Yes. We recently had to put a deck expansion on because we have so many grills.
I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
Next he needs to get a barn to put all the grill stuff in.
We'll need a new house for that.
Okay. Well, so, I mean, hey, here's hoping.
Mm-hmm.
Here's dreaming.
Yeah.
All right. And we have some specific stuff to talk about today. And we're in kind of this journey on grief and loss. And you have a unique perspective on that. So I'm going to let you take it away from wherever you want to start.
Okay, sure. So our oldest daughter, Piper, she was born in the middle of the pandemic in 2020. So that was exciting. But yeah, we decided we wanted to start a family, and we had a very uneventful pregnancy. Everything was normal. We had her at the hospital and everything seemed very typical. The only thing that happened was at the hospital, she did not pass her newborn hearing screen. And so that was really worrisome and strange. And the doctor said, oh, it happens all the time. There's probably just gunk in her ear from going through the birth canal. Like, she's probably fine. She'll just have to have another test in a month or so. So we were devastated. We were thinking like, oh my gosh, our daughter might be deaf. So we go home. Everything seems fine. A month later, go to take her to the hospital, do another test. She defers again. So then they say, yeah, she might have hearing loss. We'll need to test again. So, okay, we're trying to, accept this situation. We get connected with audiology. And we have another test and they say, yep, she definitely has hearing loss. So this is all by the time Piper's 2 months old.
Oh, my word.
And yeah. And so at this time, this is our first child. So we go home and we have no idea what we're doing anyways. But things are just not starting to add up. I'm very type A personality. So I've got all of the apps and the checklists and the milestones and the this and the that, like everything. And she's not hitting any of these milestones. She's not, something's definitely wrong. And I can tell. So we meet with our audiologist and she says, basically, it's very odd for hearing loss to happen just by itself, unless it's genetically inherited. So we want to start testing for other things. So
awesome.
we start down that journey. And so we're going to Helen DeVos, all sorts of scans and tests and ultrasounds and everything. And it's just becoming more and more obvious that something's not right. So around 3 to 4 months, babies lose their natural instinct to suck and swallow. And so Piper starts having feeding issues. I think that it's my issue with supply. Take her to a lactation consultant and they basically say, no, she has a muscle tone problem. She needs a brain MRI.
What?
Yeah. So then, we were devastated and we didn't know what was going on. So we have the brain MRI. They call us and say, yes, Piper has a severely underdeveloped brain. I mean, how do you accept that? So we don't know what to do next. We meet with, now we're at neurology at Helen DeVos and they want to start doing genetic testing. So we start all of this genetic testing. Her newborn screening that every newborn gets in Michigan and in the US all came back normal. They start doing a microarray genetic testing that comes back normal. They do a whole exome sequencing that takes 5.5 months to come back, the results. And that comes back with Piper's diagnosis. She has Pyruvate Dehydrogenase complex deficiency, also called PDCD. So what that is it's a disease of carbohydrate metabolism. So it's a metabolic disorder that essentially can cause the excess of lactic acid to build up and cause death. And it affects her entire body. So she has the underdeveloped global delay, hearing loss, vision issues, muscle tone issues, seizures, feeding issues. I mean, pretty much every department at Helen DeVos we visit. So that's the first 10 months of her life.
Oh. Mm-hmm. And probably the most confusing 10 months of yours.
Yes. And I remember, before we had kids, we really don't have many people in our family that have major disabilities. We haven't really been exposed to that. Neither one of us are necessarily unhealthy. Like we don't have a big exposure to the healthcare system and we're lucky for that. And so we start down this path and we don't know anything. And I remember going to the first neurology appointment and the doctor's trying to be very sensitive and she did a really good job. She's like, do you want to see the brain scans? And I said, yeah, but I don't know what I'm looking at. Like,
right.
So she shows me and they explain it to Mike and me. And I'm just trying to understand, okay, well, what does this mean? You say severely underdeveloped, like, will she be able to walk? Will she be able to talk? Like, what does this mean? How bad is this? And they can't tell you because the brain is so, even doctors don't know much about the brain as far as how it can reteach itself and create new pathways over time. Like she couldn't tell us anything. And I left I remember leaving there thinking like this, she doesn't know anything. Like she didn't help me at all.
You're a doctor.
Yeah.
You went to school for this.
Right. So now 3 years later, I get it. They aren't going to tell you yes or no, she'll be able to walk. Yes or no, she'll be able to do this or that because they do not know. And that's one thing that Piper has really taught us is that we never put her in a box and we never say she can or cannot do something because she's proven us wrong many times and it's her journey. It's her path. We're just on it with her and we have to support her. If we put her in a box, then she will never be able to, achieve the things that she can achieve.
Can we pause on that for a minute? Because I feel like most of the time when we get a diagnosis, that immediately categorizes the person, or in some way in our minds limits, because we then see the person through the diagnosis.
Yes. We still struggle with that. I mean, I struggle with that a lot because now 3 years in, I'm on a path of advocacy for Piper, and she's her own person regardless of the diagnosis, but yet the diagnosis is so much a part of her. So that's really hard to, even for a parent, to decipher.
On a smaller scale, but I think linked, I do a lot of work with, and I used to more now than I do actually right now, but parents who would have a child with ADHD, or they would say, "Hey, the school would say, hey, I think they have ADHD," and one of the things that I continue to wrestle with is, yeah, that may in fact be true. But if you limit what they can do based on that, like, yes, they have that, or maybe they have that. But if you limit what they do based on the diagnosis, then how is that helpful? One part, it helps you understand. So it gives context, and it maybe gives you some perspective, but it doesn't give a prescription for the future.
Right. Yeah. So for us, having the diagnosis was super important because a buildup of lactic acid is a byproduct of sugar and carbs. So the only treatment right now for Piper's disorder is to be on the ketogenic diet, which is high fat, high protein, low carbs. So we didn't get her diagnosis. Lots of
bacon.
Yeah. Right.
Lots of bacon.
So we didn't get her diagnosis until she was 10 and a half months old. So this entire almost first year of her life, we didn't even know that she was having something that she wasn't supposed to have. So that's scary. So yeah, having the diagnosis is so important just to know how to properly treat it and support her, but it doesn't define her.
Right. So when you get the diagnosis and you're like, oh my word, we've literally been feeding her the wrong things. How much guilt and shame was attached to that?
Well, some, but honestly, we didn't know. I was more mad that the diagnosis itself took so long.
Okay.
So why does this genetic testing take 5.5 months to come back?
Yeah. Why is that?
I don't know to this day. I mean, at first when we sent it in, they said you could expect, probably 3 to 4 months before this comes back. And it's because, Piper has one gene that's mutated, PDHA1, and a certain part of that gene is mutated. And that's what causes her to have this disorder. So when they do this whole exome sequencing, I mean, it's like going into a library and finding a book and finding a page and finding a word, and one of the letters in that word is wrong.
Like the Library of Congress or something.
Yes. Yeah. So that's why it takes so long. I will give them the benefit of the doubt.
I mean, I feel like, and I realize you've been on a journey with this, but I feel like you're really gracious with yourself, and I feel like you're really gracious with everybody else. But was it always that way?
No. In the beginning, it was really hard because, this is our first daughter, or our first child, period. So we have a daughter, and you just think when you're pregnant, especially with your first, that's your entire life. That's all you're focused on is when are you due? What are you getting? Like, what is this child's life going to be like? Are they going to be your best friend? Is she going to be sweet or sassy or whatever? And you imagine all of the activities and things you're going to do. So then when you get this diagnosis and you quickly realize like, oh, okay, none of that's happening. None of that. Or some of it may happen, but it's going to look far, far different than what you thought. It was a huge grieving process. And I immediately knew that I needed to speak to somebody in a therapy, setting, because this was hard. I was grieving the life that really never even existed for Piper. It was just all my expectation. And I remember trying to look up on Instagram and YouTube and all sorts of anywhere I could find like a family that had disabilities of a child with, brain underdeveloped brain, because we didn't have a diagnosis at this point. I was trying to search and just get a glimpse of what my life could look like. And I listened to podcasts, and I tried anything. And I honestly had to unfollow a lot of people that had young children that were going through the typical things that I wasn't going to experience, because it was too hard. Every single thing that I realized, we're not going to go for a walk and walk hand in hand, down the street. We're not going to be able to do baby-led weaning and introduce solid foods. And, we're not going to be able to even go to regular daycare because she's not healthy enough to do that. Our whole life was different. And I realized early on, it was hard to accept, but I realized early on that if you have all these expectations, really, Piper doesn't know any different. This is Piper's life. She's happy. But if I'm sad because of what could have been, I can't keep my brain in that space, because it would have never been, because then it wouldn't be Piper. That it just doesn't exist. But that's hard to accept.
Again, I feel like you're in a different part of that journey where you're so gracious about that. But the loss of a dream, the loss of an expectation is sometimes more hard in the grieving process than the actual loss of a person or an item. And part of that is because the dreams never go away.
Yeah. There were two people I knew that were due around the same time of Piper, like within a week or two. And one of them lives in our neighborhood, and I see them out on walks with their family. And now they have a second child that is a boy too. And it's hard, and it hits you. It's like, it hits you all of a sudden. You think you're fine. And then you see that, person online or whatever. And you just think that's not my family. Yeah. So it's hard. It is hard. Especially with now 3 years in, how involved Piper is. She's immobile. She eats with a G tube. She has seizures. So, she relies on us for everything. She's making progress but she's also growing. So as she's growing, she's really just maintaining the strength that she had, when she was littler. Yeah. Which is still amazing, but she's, the reality is she probably won't walk independently down the street one day with me. And that's okay. Maybe she will, I don't know. So yeah, it's heavy.
That's so heavy. What do you do with all that?
Well, contact Pastor Josh and talk to somebody that can really help you process it. We have really good support system of friends and family. And if we didn't have that, I don't know how we would get by, just from the emotional support, the actual support with watching the kids. Everything. I listened to so much worship music at that time of my life. I had made a playlist to play at the hospital when I was giving birth. And then I just kept playing that and added to it. And, I have a 40-minute drive to work every day. And I would be crying on my way to work many days, just listening to music and telling myself, I'm strong. God has a plan. I remember I never was mad at God. I just remember thinking, why God? And not why God, woe was me, but why God did you give me this child? Why are we Piper's parents? There has to be a deeper meaning. She's ours for a reason. Yeah. And that is answering itself every single day. There's multiple reasons for that. So,
okay. So tell us some of the reasons.
Well, she is just pure joy. And she has an amazing life, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but Mike and I, we give her everything that she possibly could. She was born into a family that just could not love her more. We work at a place that's so supportive and flexible with what we need as a family, whether that's taking time off or working part-time and going to all these appointments. And there's an advocacy wing to this too. And when we first got our diagnosis, I found a Facebook group for PDCD parents, and there was a ton of good medical information and children that have grown up with this. And so that was really helpful, but there was no momentum in, okay, how do we cure this? How do we find something better than just the ketogenic diet? Because that's not going to cure Piper. Nothing can cure Piper, but something out there surely is better than just that.
Yeah.
And so, about a year ago, there is a foundation that was started, Hope for PDCD, and another mom and dad with a daughter in California started it and rallied the troops and got a bunch of other moms and medical professionals on board. And now we have this website and this foundation and this fundraiser to fund gene therapy research. And it's really happening. There are mice that have PDCD right now that are being studied, and it's a several year-long process, but we really are going to make a difference for this disorder. And, no one's really heard of PDCD, but PDCD is actually more common than ALS. But it's very, very underdiagnosed because there's such a spectrum of how it can represent, or when it comes up in your life, it can be very severe or very minor. And when we first got the diagnosis, honestly, there were not many resources online to even look at data and medical research. And when I looked it up, it said that most girls that have this die before they are 4. So, okay, Piper's 3. And I'm like, at this time, I'm thinking, oh my God, my daughter's going to die by the time she's 4. Like, I can't go back to work. Like, I can't miss out on the few years I'm going to get with her. And that's hard. And to go to the hospital and meet with these doctors at Helen DeVos, which is an amazing children's hospital, and we're so happy with them. But even some of the doctors say, like, we really don't know that much about PDCD. We just know what we read in a textbook. I mean, that's not good enough.
No.
So thank God I found the Facebook group, and there are several children. I mean, there are hundreds of children that live into their teens and 20s with this disorder. But it's a hard journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've talked a bit on the podcast about the importance of finding a community that is safe. And for people who have children with chronic illness, rare disease, genetic mutation, or chromosomal abnormalities, it's so important to find someone who knows something about your experience. Otherwise, it can feel so lonely.
100%. And I remember maybe a year and a half ago, one of our doctors at Helen DeVos told us, we only have one other patient with this disorder. And to think that the Children's Hospital has one other patient with your child's disorder is like mind-boggling. And she actually reached out and said she knew that there was, our family was around the area too, and said, her daughter was, I think, 12 at the time, 12 or 13. And reached out and said, if she wants to contact me, I'd be happy to give her my information. So we've met a couple of times, and I text with her, and her story's a little different. They didn't have a diagnosis until her daughter was, over 10.
Oh my!
So to go all this time without a diagnosis, and she was on this journey and completely alone. She doesn't have social media. So she's, right. So she's really, exactly. So, meeting with her, and she's, asked me like, okay, tell me about your story. What happened, in the first year of Piper's life? And I'm telling her, she's like, same thing happened to me, and it's just like, you have to have that because no matter how many people close to you love you and have compassion and support you, like, you don't get it unless you get it.
You don't
And
get
that's
unless
really
you get it.
important. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's this great quote by C.S. Lewis. He says that friendship begins when you look across the table and say, you too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. We have this foundation that was started by the other parents. We have a group text chat, and it's almost a daily,
Okay.
Yeah. Advocating, complaining, asking for advice, asking for adaptive toys and different things. Like I have to have that.
I think one of the reasons why I wanted you to hear from Layna's story is she's moved into a season of acceptance and of advocacy. Now, it's not perfect, but she's found a way to find purpose in her pain. And that is so important. I want to highlight, though, as you listen to Layna's story, the importance of community. And she said it herself. She needs people, and we need people who can say, yeah, I get it. And you're not the only one. And so if you're going through a season of loss and grief, I want to stress the importance of finding people to reach out to, talking about what you're going through. Chances are someone else has an idea of what it is that life is like for you right now. You are not alone, and you don't need to go through this alone. And if this was something that hit you or it touched something in you, we want to encourage you to reach out. Send us an email to chaplaincy@fearlessfollower.org or check out our website, fearlesschaplaincy.org. We'd love to connect with you. If you work for a company and you'd like us to come in and maybe talk about some of these things, we're happy to do that. And join us as we continue on in this conversation with Layna for part 2, as we discuss more dynamics of what it means to journey with someone and love and care for someone who is chronically ill or has some unique needs. I'm excited for that next conversation, and we will talk to you next time.